Hey, what's good, everybody? Well, as we are approaching Memorial Day, um, and as the weather is getting better, I hope everybody is doing well, and that um, if you have cabin fever, your cabin fever is not that bad. Um, at least because the weather is nice and everything. Even though we could be practice even while practicing social distancing, we could still go out enjoy fresh air, and and it looks like even with this whole like COVID-19 situation, it looks like things are starting to open up a little bit. Um, as This may not be true for Chicago, but I believe Illinois, at the end of May, restaurants should be able to start um, dining people outside, outside of the restaurants, and Chicago will follow suit a few days after. Um, and Even as we hear about how people are saying that, oh, I cannot wait until things open up, I cannot wait for this, I cannot wait for that, I cannot wait till we start to go into big gatherings and 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 such like that. um you know i think um I think we finally see that the end of this whole situation is coming finally. um and One thing is that we do see on the news that some people cannot wait so much that they're beginning to become impatient, frustrated. You see all these different protests going on, and and I totally understand that staying locked down is like this for such a long time. It does do something to our psyche, our mental health, and things like that. But with that being said, it brings this whole situation brings my attention to a verse in the Psalms, specifically Psalm 27, verse 14, as it reads, "Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord." Now, what does it mean to wait for the Lord? I believe that to wait for the Lord means that the people who this psalmist was addressing was that they were in a situation where they needed to be delivered out of, and who knows what the situation was. It definitely was not an ideal situation. And what may be the situation for us? Definitely in this COVID-19 situation, aren't we waiting for this whole virus thing to end? Aren't we waiting for the vaccine to be developed? Aren't we waiting for um, businesses to open back up, the economies to open back up, schools to open back up, churches to open back up? And particularly, one thing that I am definitely looking forward to seeing is to see the churches open back up, where we could finally physically meet each other again, where we can finally greet each other, where we could finally physically fellowship with one another. And just trying to just fellowship, and keeping in touch through social media, texting, phone, Zoom calls, whatever it may be. We can only do so much digitally, right? And so we are looking forward to when we could meet together back in church, and where we could worship in a physical space together with other believers, rather than worshiping online at home. So we are waiting for that. Well, while we are waiting for that, 2 months may seem like a long time, but I want to bring our attention to some of the biblical people who have had to wait for the Lord much longer than 2 months. Like for example, in the days of Moses. See, Moses, when he was 40 years old, he saw his fellow Hebrew become mistreated. So Moses, because he wanted justice for his fellow Hebrew, what did he do? He did not wait for the Lord, but he took justice into his own hands. And when he took justice into his own hands, what happened? He had to flee to the desert, and he had to wait 40 years before God called him back to say, go back to Egypt and go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And so Moses waited 40 years to be used by God to free his fellow Hebrews. Wow. Moses had to wait for the Lord. And how about Abraham? Abraham, he was 75 years old when he was called by God, and he was promised an offspring. Abraham was promised a child because he and his wife Sarah was barren. And how long did it take for Abraham to finally receive that promised child? 25 years. Wow, what a wait. And not to even mention of how Joseph at the age of 17, young, energetic teenager, 17 years old, he had this dream that his brothers, that the whole family was bowing down before him, and that Joseph was to become a ruler. And what happened after that dream? His brothers sold him into slavery, and then when Joseph was in slavery, he was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and then he had to spend time in jail. And all in all, it took 13 years to finally become the second in hand to Pharaoh. Wow, Joseph had to wait for the Lord for 13 years. While we only have to wait for 2 months, maybe a couple more weeks, we say, let's wait until this whole thing ends. When we look at some of the biblical heroes, and they had to wait years for the Lord's deliverance. Wow. Can we not be a little bit more patient? Can we not wait for the Lord? And as it says here in this verse, be strong. Let your heart take courage. What does it mean to be strong? And what does it mean to let your heart take courage? Here's what I think it means. It means that while we wait, sometimes it looks like nothing is happening. It looks like there is no action. It looks like things are the same, and so we tend to give up hope. And what happens is that we may lose our faith in God. We may think that God, I am in this situation right now, and can you please deliver me from this and that? And then when some time passes, we're thinking like, you know what? This is not happening at all right now. Let me just give up on God. And yet the psalm is saying, wait for the Lord. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. See, to take the example of Moses, when Moses was 40 years old, and when he saw his fellow Hebrew become mistreated, Moses, instead of waiting for the Lord, he took matters in his own hand. And Moses, out of frustration, out of anger, he punched he struck the Egyptian, killed him. And so Moses, because he did not know how to wait for the Lord made him wait another 40 years. And I believe that it is in this waiting time that God has prepared Moses, so that Moses will become a more humble leader, that he will find strength not in himself, but that he will find strength in the Lord. And that Moses, that he will learn to depend on the Lord. And that Moses, that he will learn to have a shepherd's heart. And that Moses, that his heart will become more tender. And I believe that is what God is calling us to do while we are here waiting. And even as we are here waiting for this whole COVID-19 situation to end, how are you waiting for this COVID-19 situation to end? How are we cultivating our relationship with God? How are we um, how are we cultivating our relationship with people in our homes? How are we learning to become better neighbors? How are we learning to be neighbors to our neighbors who are in need? How are we waiting for the Lord? How are we bettering ourselves? How are we um, working out our process of self-awareness? And how are we learning to surrender ourselves to live a life of daily repentance? What are different ways that God is speaking to you right now? What are different ways that God is convicting to you right now? What are some ways that, because we're waiting for this situation to end, because we are still waiting for God to deliver us from different situations, from this and that, how are we drawing closer and closer to God? Let me read this verse one more time. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Amen. God bless everybody, and I hope this short devotional has been edifying and encouraging to anybody who has been watching this. And God bless you all.